me today to talk about complexity and leadership is Professor Susan Geertshuis, a professor of lifelong learning. Susan is the main coordinator of the course Leading in Complexity for the University of Auckland's MBA program. Kia ora, Susan. For someone who may not understand the concept complexities of leadership, what does that mean?
I think complexities come from several directions. So first, as a leader, there's never enough time.
Yeah.
There's never complete information. And if I ask students, what makes leadership complicated, they say, it's the people, because they're all different. And also, I think there's issues of power, because power changes things. It changes how people think and how they behave. And then, of course, last, there's the context you're being a leader in, and that too affects what should or could be done. We begin by thinking about the context for leadership, then we talk about self-leadership, because if you can't lead yourself, how can you lead others? And then we think about leading people, and then we think about leading teams or groups, and then the last module is about leading whole organisations. I think the way we think about leadership has changed. So years ago, they thought leadership capabilities were born in. You say, he's a born leader. And then they thought, maybe it's more about the skills of leadership, which is kind of good because you can learn skills. You can't change what you were born with. And more recently, it's about skills and attitudes and behaviours and values.
Interesting. Where do we get our values from, Susan? Can they be taught? Can all of these things be taught?
Well, I think it's really easy to teach knowledge. It's not too bad to teach skills, so long as you have lots of practice. But values, that's tricky. There's evidence that you can affect people's values within the moment. So if you tell a group of people, oh, you're really clever, it's good to be clever, and another group of people, you're not so clever, then you can predict their performance. There'll be a big difference. You haven't changed their real ability. And the same if you persuade people, you can get cleverer. Intelligence is something you can grow. They'll actually do it. Whereas if you help convince people that intelligence is fixed, and if you fail, that's because you weren't smart enough, that becomes true too. So we can shape values, we can shape behaviour, but the tricky bit is shaping people's values so it sustains across context and time, and we don't know exactly how to do that. And then there's also the ethical side of shaping values. So what right have I to tell somebody what their values should be? What all I can do really is show them some evidence and some options, and maybe challenge their existing values by showing that in this situation they're not so helpful, and leave the responsibility for changing to the individual.
One of the things that's kind of interesting about this topic is just how broad it is. It's vague, but it's specific, and it's like it just feels so overwhelmingly big. How does it work?
I think it's yes to all of the above. So there's a multiplicity of theories about leadership, and they each have a place. And the older theories tend to assume that the leaders know best, and they will direct things, and they're working within a hierarchical organisation. And they have a place. But then the newer theories recognise that sometimes our leaders don't know what to do. Things change fast. Our organisations are flatter, so they have less power. And so then that's another suite of theories. And no one theory will suit every situation. So I think what we'll be trying to do is help students to select between theories and recognise this situation. That theory helps me understand this situation, but when I face that, that theory explains what was going on then.
Interesting.
So we help them try and get the theories come alive.
So it's like a suite of resources and ways of thinking about things, and then they can tailor whatever their unique situation is to the resource.
Just like a tradie has a bag of tools, hopefully our leaders have a bag of theories and ideas and techniques.
I really love that idea. In what ways has leadership changed over the years?
Everybody's heard, I think, of the fourth industrial revolution and how fast technology is changing, and how our concerns have shifted towards climate change, and there's geopolitical unrest, and all these things are affecting organisations and the world of business. So people say that the world in which leadership takes place now is VUCA, they say, so it's volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. But there's another acronym that I like a little bit better. It's BANI. And what it says is we used to go about leadership with a suite of assumptions. We thought the world was robust. It's not. The world is brittle. And we thought of people as resources who we could kind of manipulate. They're not. People are anxious. And we thought we could predict the future from the past in a kind of linear way, but it's non-linear. The rate of change is escalating, so we can't accurately predict. And we used to think, if as leaders we work really hard, we could understand the situations, but it's not, it's incomprehensible. And that leaves you to BANI. These false assumptions can really revolutionise the way you make decisions and the way leaders orchestrate their businesses.
How fascinating.
It is, isn't it?
There's an agility and there's a fluidity to modern day leadership.
Yeah,
would you say?
absolutely, yes.
So what are the first steps in becoming a good leader?
I think self-reflection is a massively important tool that people have, because if you don't know what your values are and you don't know what your strengths and weaknesses are, and you're not perhaps aware of your biases, then it's quite difficult to grow from there. I used to interview people for jobs and they'd sometimes tell me, oh, I've got 20 years experience at da-da-da. And as they're talking, I'm thinking, no, you've got 1 year's experience, but you've had it 20 times, because they haven't thought about their mistakes. They haven't listened to others. They haven't reflected on what's going on. So I think this reflection, thinking about what happened, hugely powerful. As I say to folk, the best coach you'll ever have is you, because no one cares more about you or knows you better than you.
Right. And if you're in a good place, then you're in a better position to lead others.
Absolutely. Your behaviour really affects how others behave. So this is so powerful. A leader who wakes up in the morning and hasn't had enough sleep, it affects their subordinates during that day, and they won't know. They don't know that at all. But it's quite a robust finding.
How important is vulnerability, would you say?
Well, I suppose if you're living in a world where you actually know all the answers and you have ultimate power, being certain is quite handy. But if you're in a world where this is really complicated, I'm not sure what to do, I'm needing to rely on all these people, faking it is quite unwise. People want to trust you. You need to be honest. And it's a bit of a paradox, because you need to be honest and open, but also quite calming. So if you're mid-panic, maybe not share that.
Yep, I understand that. Can failure be a positive thing for leaders?
You don't learn anything unless you fail occasionally. But I think failing in a safe way is good as a leader. Sometimes folks say, no problem is so awful that you can't make it worse. So yes, cautiously. Small experiments that may or may not fail, but if they fail, it's not catastrophic, is a really good way to go forward in an environment that's so complex that you can't find a single path.
What makes a leader good, and who decides?
Well, I think the subordinates decide, because if the leader decided, we'd all be fantastic. And what makes a leader good depends on the situation. If you imagine now that you're in a combat zone and you're people are threatening you, you don't want a leader that dithers. But imagine now You want somebody who says, we're going to do this, you do that, you do that. But imagine now you're designing a new advert for something. Really, what do you think? I think this. So a collaborative leader is much better there.
Does a good leader need to be the most experienced person in order to lead in a group?
I think experienced in the art of leadership would help, but you cannot now be more experienced and better at everything that your team's doing. You employ them because they're better than you are at all the tasks that they do. So no, they don't need to be that experienced. And I think part of it is about leading in an old sense, in delegating tasks, creating certainty, making sure things are done. But another part of it is creating the environment so people can excel, so people want to work, and so that they'll give their best to your organisation without you saying, please do this, can you do this, and I'll watch whether you've achieved it or not.
Are there any unique challenges to leading people specifically in Aotearoa?
Some of the students work for quite large organisations, and often their head offices are overseas, and their head office may have an organisational culture that's not quite the same as ours here, and I think that's a challenge for our leaders. They have maybe limited influence. And then other of our students work for very small organisations, and then they're probably covering several roles and have quite a lot of influence and responsibility. So I think that's a little bit of a difference. And I also think, in some senses, we're isolated. We're a little country at the bottom of the world. And in another sense, the whole world's here. So sometimes you'll have as many languages in the class as you have people. And so that's a massive privilege, yes. So I think it is unique.
Do you look at things like Indigenous cultures inside? Like, is there an element of it that looks at kind of dealing with Māori issues in leadership?
Māori issues come up, but so does, how does this work in Asia? How does this work when you've got a group of staff from this heritage? And there, I think it's a topic for discussion in the class where everybody brings their stories. I think stories are a wonderful way to learn. We remember stories. And if I have a concept and we have stories about this and stories about that, I really get to understand this kind of ambiguous concept really well. Yes. If I can layer stories around it.
What leadership qualities does someone need to inspire confidence in others?
Role modelling's good. Trust is good, isn't it? Sometimes you have a triumph of confidence over competence, so you don't want immeasurable confidence all the while. I think a tolerance of failure and an openness and a curiosity. Yeah, people feeling safe to do their best.
What are the most important communication skills a leader can have?
Yeah, a lot of it's about communication, because you might have the best idea in the world and if nobody knows about it, I think in today's world, listening. Because as you become a leader and you get more power, the truth can be hidden from you. Yeah. And you need really to wonder, am I listening? Am I hearing the truth? Are people able to share? Yeah. So I think listening's the most important. And I think then communicating messages without a lot of gobbledygook and business speak, so that people see how your words have implications for them.
Listening, caring, and plain speaking.
It's simple then, isn't it?
How important is transparency when you're building trust with other people?
Well, who's going to follow a leader that they know lies to them and doesn't fulfill their promises? So, yeah, I think you've got to be seen to be fair. And so having transparent processes. So even if decisions aren't agreeable to everybody, that they can see how they came about and that the process was all right.
Do you look at case studies?
Yes, we have lots of case studies. They're often quite short scenarios, and so people work through some of them online, and then some will have come to one conclusion and some will come to another, and then they can talk about them in the live sessions.
The last pillar of your course is leading teams and organisations. How will studying complexity theory help students think about organisations differently?
Management researchers have thought about organisations as systems for a very long while. And you can imagine that traditional organisational chart, and that they view organisations as having inputs, a kind of transformational process where all the little cogs and all the little departments work together to produce these outputs. So that's one view of a system. Complexity theory says, no, it's a system, but the metaphor's wrong. It's an ecosystem. And so what you've got are multiple agents or nodes in this network, in this ecosystem. Each of them is agentic, so uncontrollable to some extent. Each has it's their own theories and their own opinions. And as we know with ecosystems, that they're more robust, the more diversity you have in your ecosystem. And we also know from ecosystems that they adapt more rapidly if there's lots of connections between the nodes. And so it helps us think about how can we help our organisations become more adaptable, more agile. And we know ecosystems can seem quite resilient and then go into catastrophic change. Organisations do it too. So how can we anticipate that and manage that? And then we know ecosystems sometimes change, and so it helps us think about where are the new ideas coming from? How can I give oxygen to those ideas and suffocate those ideas?
It's like an organic thing.
That's it.
Do you look at leadership, how leaders can manage change within groups of people in an organic way? Because some people are terrified of change and don't want it to happen. Other people are open and flexible. And
really important that leaders understand change. Leadership must involve change, otherwise you don't need a leader if you just want things to chug along. And again, these challenges with managing change depend on your kind of metaphor. So if you have the older metaphor, the closed system, then change, you want stability.
yeah.
And then change is about unsettling, it's about helping people become ready to change and not too resistant, and then managing the change and then getting back to stability. Now, if you go to the complexity theory thinking about change, there is no stability. Change is ubiquitous and continuous, and your job then is to keep the business going in some, but also be looking for this change and helping the organisation become adaptable to absorb the change quickly. Completely different views of leadership.
Yes. And do you cover things like crisis management?
A crisis is caused by a catastrophic event that really affects your business. So one of the things is, I think, beforehand, to try and stop having crises by some contingency planning and dreaming up what happens if this building falls out, what happens if we've no electricity, what happens. So that, but once you're in, I think, a situation of crisis, it's got to be about calm, otherwise people can't think. And I think the leader's job then is to think about something that gets people a kind of temporary fix and then allocate the right resources. I think it's about being honest. It's those paradoxes between calming folk, but also helping people with the truth.
Yes.
I don't think there's a brilliant way to handle a crisis. There's going to be fallout.
There's also an external element to it, right? In terms of written comms, and businesses and organisations during a crisis can come under pretty intense pressure. How important is it to get the comms part of it right when you're dealing externally as a leader?
We look at some examples of very poor efforts, and then we ask the class to improve them.
Nice.
Being able to show folk different kind of announcements and messages and saying, what's the risks here and how can we make things honest but better?
Beautiful, Susan. That was wonderful. Thanks so much. If you found Leading in Complexity interesting, feel free to check out the innovative and world-class MBA at the University of Auckland, where this topic and many other fascinating and important issues are explored.